YouTube, what's going on? Okay, I want to address a point that I forgot to do a long time ago. If you guys remember, about a week ago, I did a video about the Catherine Foghorn something Folan, whatever her name is, and she went on TV talking about how the parents prevented black women who were born in the 60s from dating white because, the parents were part of an era where it just wasn't okay. And I got upset because she wanted to act as if it was the black parents preventing white men and black women from going off and living happily ever after. She didn't want to mention how white parents would pretty much turn over right in their grave if they were dead, or literally disown their son or their daughter, and for doing so. But she wanted to act like it was black parents who said no. Okay, and what pisses me off, first of all, is the whole utter lack of what was going on with black people in the 60s and early 70s. First of all, in terms of who you choose to date, yeah, a lot of it has to do with what your parents have to say, but a lot of it has to do with your experiences growing up. It is what it is. How you grew up, it will determine who you're checking for. How many black women talk about how they got hated on as a young black girl and as a teenager, so they're not checking for black men. And the same for men, okay? They talk about how, I was too this, I wasn't tall enough, I was too dark, my gear wasn't on point, right? So now that they're older, they're not checking. So your childhood and, growing up, your pre-adult years shape who you're going to check for when you're ready to start dating. Okay, so if you were born in the 60s as a black woman, you probably weren't dating till the 80s, mid-80s, right? Seriously. But in terms of what you're looking for, a lot of it will be based off of how you grew up. Yes, if I was born in the 80s, which I was, the life that I grew up in would be different from somebody who grew up in the 60s. Okay? Right? But just because things are different in the 80s doesn't mean that erases what you've been through during the 60s. Okay? Just like now, even though it's 2010, things are different, but part of my viewpoint in terms of what I'm checking for is based off of what I've seen growing up as a child and a teenager in the 80s and the 90s. Okay? Now, if you were black, if you were a child in the 60s and the early 70s, the whole idea of getting racism wasn't anything new. Your parents didn't have to tell you about, what happened to them in terms of when they're out on the town. You got it too. Okay? So the little white boy and girl were racist to the little black boy and girl. We don't want to sit by you. You can't play with us. Go home. Okay, how many images do we find and how many documentaries are there where they have the National Guard, protecting, the few black kids from going into this all-white school when people had to integrate? What pisses me off about this Folan character is that she wants to act like integration was a good thing. As if, integration, made it so that, white people and black people were singing Kumbaya, and it was only, the black parents who had a problem with it. As if a black person who grew up in the 60s and the 70s can't tell you the shit that they got from people in their same age range. White people hated integration. They actively resisted it. Okay? They put it into law, but people were like, still, hell no. We're not going to accept this. So the National Guard had to come into play. What kind of shit is that? Where they have to come into play. So this whole idea that, everybody was singing Kumbaya and they were happy is complete bullshit. So forget what your parents have to say. You as a black child, you got that shit directly. Directly. Okay, the whole idea of white flight, and the whole idea of, one black person moving into this middle class community had everybody moving. Property values just plummeted. So you have the whole idea of, what's the redlining or whatever they call it. All that came about in this time era. And as a child, like I said, you caught it. You weren't insulated from it. It was blatant right in front of your face. So when you're ready to start dating officially in the mid 80s and early 80s, are you really going to be checking as a black woman? Is that what you're really going to be checking for? As a black man, is that really what you're going to be checking for? Forget what the parents have to say. Just based off of the shit that you went through, the whole Black Panther movement, the whole idea of Malcolm X and MLK being killed, black people rioting, you know, the whole decline of public education, the whole idea of drugs in the community, all that shit, okay, you went through directly. We talk about it now because we are somewhat removed from it, okay, but they were there when it happened. So to see, your community growing up as a child slowly turn into, what it is today, you were there firsthand. And like I said, I got upset because she wanted to come on and throw all that out the window. Right? And once again, recreate history to somehow support this whole idea that white men and black women were checking for each other, and it was always been this forbidden love, and the black parents said it wasn't so, and we listened to what our parents had to say. I'm like, dude, do y'all hear what she's saying? What kind of bullshit is that? And no, I wouldn't accept it if a black man said the same thing, because it's also bullshit. Bullshit. Let's be real here. Right? Once again, another detached, educated black woman. But because she's black, she gets this pass. As if everything that comes out of her mouth is the gospel truth. Right? But in reality, she's fabricating something so that it sounds good. That's the part that annoys me. Right? And that's why I did the video, and now I'm making this one. Now, if you grew up in the 80s, okay, in the 90s, were things different? Yeah, they were. Okay? You look at the 80s, black culture became cool. We became part of the mainstream. You had hip hop, the rise of rap and R&B. So it was okay. So the parents may have still understood that they need to stay away from black people, and our parents knew what was up, don't get me wrong. But in terms of the kids growing up, yeah, it wasn't as blatant. Growing up in the 80s and 90s, I don't think anybody can say that, yeah, people were just as racist to black people in the 80s and the 90s as they were in the 60s. No, because there was a little bit more exposure. Okay, you can't have Michael Jordan running around, dunking a basketball, and Eddie Murphy making people laugh, on Saturday Night Live and Beverly Hills Cop, and not have, younger teenage and, childhood age white boys and white girls not seeing black people as being cool. Does that mean they're taking you home and, oh, mommy, we want to date a black guy? No. Like I said, the parents were still hell no. You better not bring home anybody who's black or Latino. You better not. But in regards to how the actual children felt, it wasn't as bad. It wasn't as bad. So if you were born in the 80s and 90s, to get to the 2010 sort of decade, right, it makes perfect sense in terms of, where we are now, present day. It does make more sense to see this whole idea of, non-black people checking for each other. Because they themselves weren't there when America was still trying to figure out what they were going to do in terms of racial relations. Okay? And like I said, now it's more so of a parental thing. Okay, in terms of those holding on to this whole idea that, you better not bring somebody home or you better not do X, Y, and Z. But in terms of how you grew up, right, it makes perfect sense for some people to feel like, yeah, why shouldn't I go out? When I was a kid, I played with, Jamal, or, I played with Mindy, right? I don't have a problem with her. My parents might, but I myself don't. Okay? So if she would have came on and talked about that and not the 60s when things were chaotic, then I would more so respect her viewpoint. But definitely, the way she put it out there, I can't respect it whatsoever. At all. Because what she's saying is not accurate. It doesn't add up. Not in the least. And for her to downplay what was going on, y'all remember that church bombing in Birmingham, Alabama, where what was it, like 4 10 to 12-year-old girls got killed in a church? You know, the KKK set off a bomb in Birmingham, Alabama. That was in 1963. So, you know, young black boys and girls saw that. But according to this Folin girl, with all that going on, they were still checking for white men, and white men were still checking for them, and it was the black parents that said, oh, no, you better not bring home a white boy. Right? As if those black women got to the 1980s and that went away. Oh, you know, black girls being killed by white men? Oh, forget that. That happened, 15 years ago. I'm definitely checking for white men now. Forget you, mommy and daddy. That sounds so stupid and foolish. So y'all take it easy. Tell me how you feel. God bless.